This video is part of our investigation into resveratrol that started with this shocking discovery in Dr. David Sinclair's own study that showed that low resveratrol worked better for longevity than high resveratrol. It's been a complete shock to me as I've been taking 1 gram of resveratrol on alternate days for 3 years now. Since this discovery, I've gone over 200 studies on resveratrol, and I'm here to tell you that this molecule is much more powerful and complex than I ever imagined. What we're about to uncover today is one of resveratrol's biggest secrets. And it's kept very well within its polyphenol family, which includes fisetin, quercetin, pterostilbene, and others. So today we will understand how these molecules affect our systems, what they do to our bodies, and even to our DNA after we take them. We're also going to answer, what does resveratrol do to cancer cells? Is resveratrol a good supplement to kill cancer or preventing it? Let's continue with our investigation into the secrets of resveratrol right now. Welcome to the Wellness Messiah podcast. I'm your host, Rimon. What have we seen so far? We know that low levels of resveratrol activating longevity in humans and animals. And we know that resveratrol increases the average lifespan both in animals, mice, and insects. We also have seen that lower than half a gram of resveratrol improves blood sugar and insulin in humans, in addition to longevity markers both tested in the wine studies. And wine has very low levels of resveratrol. Now we are moving to the really interesting part. Are you ready for this? So we know that low resveratrol works better for longevity than high levels of resveratrol. But why? If in Dr. David Sinclair's study the small dose resveratrol lived longer in both groups, why this sudden change of impact when going high in resveratrol? It seems that something changes when we go up in the dose. This is the time to expose the dirty secrets of this longevity molecule. In fact, I think that these secrets are kept very well within this polyphenol entire family. Ready for this? Pay attention carefully. The secret to our puzzle lies in the effect of resveratrol on cancer cells. What is cancer? Cancer is a name for a disease, of course, but what are cancer cells, the cause behind this terrible disease? To understand what cancer cells are, we need to understand how our body works. Despite using in our language the human body as a singular noun, it is not single. The body is a country, a republic, composed of 30 trillion individual cells, and all these tiny cells work together to serve you. This service is your health. But for that, they need to work for the Republic, not for themselves. And cancer cells are individual cells too. Originally the same as our healthy cells, but they broke away from the Republic and behave aggressively towards it. You already know that cancer cells divide uncontrollably, consuming all the foods of the Republic and invading into nearby cells and tissues. They are criminal cells in the country that is our health. And they are extremely dangerous for the Republic for one simple reason. You just need one of these cells to divide excessively to potentially cause a disease. Just one single cell can potentially cause cancer, a disease that can bring the entire Republic down to its knees. And our bodies are fully aware of this danger, as well as the DNA in every cell of our bodies. Therefore, your body has mechanisms both within the DNA and outside in the blood, the police of the entire community, which is the immune system, to kill those cells. This DNA programming, meaning a regulation by the DNA on the cell's behavior, is called apoptosis, and it's an important term for us today. The DNA suspects the cell has become cancerous will activate this program. In biology, as I said, we call this apoptosis, and it's a potent way to kill cancer cells and even other stubborn cells that don't want to die. Now in this section, I will go over many studies of resveratrol and cancer, because I want to prove to you without any reasonable doubt what will come next. At the end of this sequence of studies, I'm going to explain what it means, so don't worry if you don't fully understand it immediately. It will become much clearer as we progress in this video. This conclusion holds the secret of resveratrol and will help you choose the right dose for longevity and for health, so stay with me. Let's examine the impact of high resveratrol. How does high resveratrol affect the human body? We're gonna go study after study and let's see what happens. This study from 2010 called Dose Dependency of Resveratrol in Providing Health Benefits. I'm quoting, "Studies have shown that at a lower dose, resveratrol acts as anti-apoptotic, as evidenced by increased expression in cell survival proteins. So low resveratrol helps the cell survive." Then they say, at higher dose, resveratrol acts as a pro-apoptotic compound, inducing apoptosis in cancer cells by exerting death signal. At higher dose, resveratrol not only hinders tumor growth, but also inhibits the synthesis of RNA and DNA in protein, so it prevents the cell from dividing. So this study says in essence that resveratrol at different doses does completely opposite things. Let's see another study. This one from 2017. Dual effects of resveratrol on cell death and proliferation of colon cancer cells. Here we study the impact of resveratrol over a 100-fold concentration range on cell death and proliferation. We found that a lower concentration, resveratrol increased the cell number, as did the polyphenol quercetin. As you can understand from here, it's not just resveratrol, it's also its family. At a higher dose resveratrol reduced the cell number and increased the percentage of apoptotic or necrotic cells, thus indicating cytotoxicity, so resveratrol becomes toxic to the cell. This is another study from 2013. Resveratrol induces cell death in cervical cancer cells through apoptosis and autophagy. Cervical neoplasia is one of the most frequent cancers in women. Of course, we are talking about cervical cancer. Here is what they say. Resveratrol treatment in high dose induced apoptosis in all cell lines. There was a decrease in the mitochondrial membrane potential, apoptosis. So resveratrol somehow, via the mitochondria, trigger apoptosis in cervical cancer in humans. This is another study from 2014, resveratrol and cancer. Now they spoke about 1997 study. Topical application of the compound was able to inhibit tumor formation in the two-stage skin cancer. Topical resveratrol prevented tumor formation by promoting apoptosis. What is topical application? Concentrated resveratrol right on the tumor. It is high-dose resveratrol, and again, it causes apoptosis. This is another study. Resveratrol at high doses acts as apoptotic inducer in endothelial cells. I'm quoting, resveratrol was shown to act as a pro-apoptotic agent, and the researcher concluded, resveratrol plays an important role in endothelial cell apoptosis, indicating that resveratrol can be utilized as a potent angiogenic drug, meaning prevention of growth of blood vessels for the cancer. And this is a fresh study from 2022. Here they also measure both low resveratrol and high resveratrol on an active tumor, and they coupled resveratrol with metformin. This is what they found. High concentration of resveratrol inhibited cell growth and induced both autophagy and apoptosis. In this study, they found that high-dose resveratrol worked in synergy with metformin to kill cancer cells. And they also showed that low dose had the opposite effect, helping the cell to survive. In this situation, when you have cancer, you don't want to help the cell to survive. Now, this is very interesting, but I have something even more interesting to show you right now. Do you remember the excellent mice study that we showed from 2008, where they put the mice on low dose of resveratrol and it activated many longevity genes? One of the things they were looking for after the mice died is to see an anti-tumor effect of low dose resveratrol. Remember, it's low resveratrol, not high resveratrol. What do you think they found? Let's read from the study. This is a segment about tumor formation in old age. So they dissected the liver of the old mice after they died. I'm quoting, there was also no decrease in spontaneous tumors at the time of the sacrifice. In particular, spontaneous liver tumors were abundant in mice fed the controlled diet or resveratrol, but rare in caloric restriction mice. So low-dose resveratrol, unlike caloric restriction, did not inhibit cancer growth. That's the greatest difference they found in this study between caloric restriction, which we know extend lifespan, to resveratrol, which we found mainly extend health span and also reduces mortality. That gives us a huge hint here. But the researchers were very smart. Let's say what they thought about this result. They came up with the speculation. It is likely that the effects of resveratrol feeding at lower dose are distinct than those observed with higher doses. So there is no doubt the differences in impact between low resveratrol and high resveratrol are completely different. Now we have a mystery. How come the same molecule does two completely opposite things? because that is what matters the most for our longevity. We need to figure this one out. Without understanding that, we can never know which dose to take and when to take it. In the beginning of this video, I explained how cell death program works in the DNA, but we are missing another program, the self-survival program. Let's hear now Dr. David Sinclair explaining the genetic survival program, and then we will connect both programs together to discover finally how resveratrol works and why it's so mysterious. This is from Dr. David Sinclair's YouTube channel.
These signaling proteins, like the DAF2 one that Cynthia discovered, and the sirtuins that we work on, we didn't know what they were doing at first. It was like, this is crazy. It's got nothing to do with DNA repair and free radicals. But then when we tracked what they were actually doing, it turns out they're speaking to the rest of the cell to keep the cell healthy and alive. So in the case of that worm, those worms weren't just longer lived. The program to survive was activated. Those worms are stress resistant. You can hit them with heat, you can hit them with cold, you can starve them, or just put them in happy conditions. They live longer. The paradigm is that normally a worm responds to its environment. If it's starved, it'll hunker down, it'll survive. But here we had a worm that was mimicking starvation and was able to have the benefits without having to starve itself.
Making decisions isn't easy. Making quick decisions about important things is even more difficult. A tiebreaker is a method that you and I use to make important decisions quickly. You and I specifically use this tiebreaker decision making when we are making decisions using money and deciding what to do with resources in general. For example, during the pandemic, my laptop got damaged. It was a rather old laptop and I couldn't use it. Should I throw it away and buy a new one, or should I fix it? Both options are not cheap. The tiebreaker here is the amount of money I have in that moment in my bank account. If I have a lot of money, I'll buy a new laptop, no doubt. If I'm going to fix it, what if it breaks down again? But if I don't have excess amount of money, I'll repair the laptop, increasing its longevity. Luckily, during the pandemic, I was totally broke, so it was a simple decision, and I took the laptop to the repairman. This is an example of tiebreaker where money is the tiebreaker in the decision making. Our bodies and the DNA too use this tiebreaker method in making important decisions. One of those decisions is whether to help a stressed or damaged cell to live longer and repair it, or to get rid of the stressed cell and create a new cell instead. Both options are expensive for the body, and our bodies can only choose one. Our bodies here too are using the help of the tiebreaker. Whereas in my situation with my laptop, the tiebreaker was the amount of money I had in that time. In our body, it's used the amount of stress the cell has. I define stress here as accumulated damage or a threat to the future survival of the cell. When I say a threat, I mean that the body suspects that this cell won't survive much later. Similar to my thinking with my laptop. If I'm going to repair it, will it survive? And if so, for how long? Now, I said the body is making the decision, but it's not really the body. It's truly the DNA that had its hand on the wheel. And here is how the DNA thinks. If there is a small amount of stress, the DNA is optimistic. It will decide to keep the cell alive. Expensive decision, but it will lead to the youthfulness preservation of the cell. However, if there is a lot of stress or damage, the DNA is pessimistic. The DNA thinks that if it's going to repair this cell with this large amount of stress, it still may not survive. Maybe it's a waste of resources. Here, the DNA decides to get rid of the cell and replace it with a new one. In biology, this decision by the DNA is called apoptosis. And the DNA actually used this method to get rid of old cells and also cancer cells. In the last 15 years, I've seen this stress level as a tiebreaker in other places. For example, you can check the amino acid called L-proline. The body used this same amino acid both to save the cell from dying and also to kill it. This same mechanism do the two exact things based on the amount of stress. So the DNA has two options, longevity or death. What has this to do with resveratrol? Do you remember why grapes produce resveratrol in red wine? It's because the grape skin is exposed to the stress of yeast and alcohol. And the plants use this resveratrol to deal with this stress. Whether resveratrol stresses the DNA directly or activates a bunch of stress enzymes which the DNA has a read on, it doesn't matter. Essentially, when the DNA sees resveratrol, it sees stress. And the DNA views the amount of resveratrol as an indication of the total amount of stress the cell has been exposed to. When the DNA sees low levels of resveratrol, it sees low levels of stress. So the DNA turns off bad aging genes and turns up good longevity genes. The DNA makes a decision for the cell to live longer. Longevity. When the DNA sees high concentration of resveratrol in the cell, it sees high levels of stress, and the DNA becomes more pessimistic. It makes the decision to push the cell towards death. Let's kill the cell and create a new one with the parts and energy that we have saved. That makes sense. Now you can easily see why resveratrol will trigger different responses in different doses, and we can use both of these doses to our different purposes. So this is one of the main secrets of resveratrol. Now remember my old laptop? Interestingly enough, I'm still using this laptop to record this very video. Who knew that it will survive more than 2 years later after it collapsed? That's longevity. And for longevity, you don't want to throw away things. You want to repair them. Exactly like with my laptop, we never know how long the cell can survive. I want to give you another analogy just to make sure that you're hearing me on the same page, because this is important. Owning a car. When you own a car, you are the owner. You have your hands on the wheel, just like the DNA. The car in this situation is like the cell, the encapsulation of the DNA. Now, if you have a car that got a minor hit or got a puncture, you're gonna pay money and repair it. There is no question. You will make the decision for the car to live longer. You're not gonna throw it away. However, if you suspect that your car is too depreciated, you go every week to the mechanic. It means that your car has went under too much stress for too long. You're pessimistic about the future of this car. Here, you would rather sell the car and use the profit to buy a completely new car. The tiebreaker in this situation for you is how much stress and damage your car has suffered, so you can make a decision about how to allocate resources properly. So here, the DNA is the owner of the car and the decision maker, and here the cell is the car, and resveratrol indicates the overall amount of stress that the car has suffered. Does that make sense to you? So this is the insight, and this is the theory, and we already proved we know that low resveratrol is good for longevity. This corresponds well with low levels of stress in the cell and for the DNA. And today we also proven the other aspect of this. Without any doubt, high resveratrol triggers the cell death program in the human body, in the human cells. This program is very good for killing cancer cells. Now we have an interesting question. So having said and having seen what we have seen, isn't this anti-cancer pro-apoptosis cell death activity good? Well, sometimes, but not all the time. Do you remember my laptop example? By helping my laptop to survive, it lived longer. Making healthy cells survive longer helps longevity, as long as they do not become cancerous. But there is a time and place for everything. From time to time, forcing cancer cells to die can be good. I want to give you another analogy. You know, our bodies are like large organizations of cells. The purpose of this organization, containing 30 trillion cells working all together, is to make you healthy. You are the only customer that this corporation serves. And like every fit organization, we need to take some time to lay off some unproductive employees. Every quarter, you need to fire some employees in the organization to open up space for new recruits. But you don't want to fire employees all the time. You don't want to put stress on employees to commit suicide, meaning to quit their job. You don't want to push cells to die for no good reasons all the time, even if they're just slightly damaged or are exposed to high levels of resveratrol. That will not lead to healthy, long-lived community, and it will not lead to a long, healthy living body. This is one of the main reasons why in Sinclair studies, high-dose resveratrol was not good for longevity. Now we have an interesting question. Remember, based on what Dr. David Sinclair does, I used to take 1 gram of resveratrol. Now what 1 gram of resveratrol does in humans? I found a fantastic study that measured exactly that. 1 gram of resveratrol on healthy humans. Let's see what they found. This study from 2010, called Resveratrol Modulates Drug and Carcinogen Metabolizing Enzymes in a Healthy Volunteer Study. That's important, because remember, most of the studies on resveratrol happen to be on sick individuals. This is what they did and what they found. 42 healthy volunteers were participating in this study. Study participants took 1 gram of resveratrol once daily for 4 weeks. The researcher said, we conclude that resveratrol can modulate enzyme systems involved in carcinogen activation and detoxification, which may be one mechanism by which resveratrol inhibits carcinogenesis. So what they say that 1 gram of resveratrol gives protection against cancer. This corroborates that the dose I used to take, 1 gram, it fits to the activity of high-dose resveratrol. So 1 gram of resveratrol will help us to kill cancer cells in the immediate time frame, but in the long term, it won't increase lifespan if we use it chronically. And to me, low-dose and high-dose resveratrol are completely different supplements with different impacts. Since we spoke about cancer, I want to put a legal disclaimer. All this talk about cancer isn't a suggestion for cancer therapy or any medical advice or suggestion of any kind. Let me tell you my personal perspective, what I do with this information. Frankly, I'm doing other things to protect myself from cancer. Low-dose resveratrol has a different role in my overall strategy. As a subscriber, you probably already know that. If you're outside of the subscription, remember that resveratrol is just one supplement in the overall longevity and youthfulness preservation strategy. This is what we talk about in this channel. There is another thing about my body. Our bodies, when we are young, have a very robust, strong anti-cancer protection. I'm 35 and I don't need resveratrol pushing cells to die. When I'm going to be 50, my perspective is going to change. High-dose resveratrol will probably be a very active strategy in my lifestyle. Last note about resveratrol and cancer. This is very important. I would never take low-dose resveratrol or even drink red wine with low-dose polyphenols if I had an active tumor in my body. I don't want to do anything that is going to help these defective cells survive or keep them young. I want to push them towards death. Staying alive is more urgent than preserving youthfulness. Let's get back to the dichotomy between low resveratrol and high resveratrol, because now we are really delving into resveratrol secrets. This impact of high resveratrol that we just uncovered can explain a lot of things that confused us before. It can explain the results of Dr. Sinclair's study, when low resveratrol worked better for longevity. It can explain the results we have seen with humans, both in red wine activating longevity genes, and the results with the blood sugar insulin study in humans, where less than 500 milligrams of resveratrol actually worked better and more consistent. This also explains how come red wine, with supposedly low levels of resveratrol and other polyphenols, is still effective in reducing mortality in humans and activating longevity genes. And the last insight here, and this is a big one, this has to do with another controversy in resveratrol. We solved here another huge mystery. How come resveratrol not extending lifespan in healthy mice, but does so in obese mice and potentially obese people? So one of the criticisms of resveratrol is that it does not increase maximum lifespan. There is no doubt that resveratrol increases health span, and it reduces mortality, as we have seen. Reducing mortality means that on average we live longer, and health span means that we end up with a healthier body all throughout until the end. But maximum lifespan, how far we can potentially live, the maximum reach that we can achieve, that's debatable about low resveratrol. And even if low resveratrol increases somehow maximum lifespan, which actually happened with the every other day feeding in Sinclair's study, this is only a marginal increase. It's not a big one. On that, there is no doubt. So why does resveratrol not increasing maximum lifespan on healthy people? Because you cannot increase the maximum lifespan without reducing cancer and tumors. We want to stay young and alive at the same time. And cancer doesn't care how healthy and young the rest of the body is. It's just a defective cell that hurts the organization. These animals I showed you with the low resveratrol, they died with healthy younger bodies, but with tumors, just like they showed in the mice study. So how can resveratrol increase the maximum lifespan of obese animals? Let's think about it. Obese animals die earlier because of cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And what resveratrol does? Resveratrol does protect the cardiovascular system, keeps the heart young, and reduces sugar levels. This way, low-dose resveratrol targets the exact reasons obese mice and probably obese people die prematurely. Now you understand the mystery. Now you understand why obese mice and possibly obese people are very likely to live longer in their maximum potential on low resveratrol dose, but not necessarily healthy, thin people. Does that make sense to you? So that's how resveratrol dose can impact cancer cells and our longevity. This helps us a lot to our investigation, as well as understanding the tiebreaker system inside of every cell in our bodies: longevity or death. But besides cancer cells, there is another type of extremely dangerous cells that you might have heard of. These cells are the hottest topic in our longevity community: senescent cells. These aging infecting cells are a real threat to your longevity. They can age your entire body, infecting other young cells with aging. A serious problem. Now we are about to discover what resveratrol does to senescent cells in different doses. I'm sure that this is going to surprise you, since I was shocked when I discovered this. And this senescent cell piece is another huge piece in our investigation. And prove once and for all that resveratrol in different doses is a completely two different supplements. Ready for this? Pay attention carefully. What impact does resveratrol have in different doses on senescent cells? We cannot truly understand that until we understand what senescent cells are, what they do to our bodies, and what are we trying to do with them. Similar to cancer cells, senescent cells are renegade cells that hurt the republic of the healthy 30 trillion cells that are responsible for our health. Let's hear Dr. David Sinclair speaks about what senescent cells are.
Senescent cells
are zombie-like cells, the ones that accumulate over time in your body, probably because their epigenome gets screwed up. But what they do is they shut down, they stop dividing, and they start secreting inflammatory factors and also factors that cause cancer.
Yeah, and so getting rid of those would be presumably a good thing. And that's what fisetin and quercetin appear to do.
They do in the dish and in mice. And there are even some human studies now that show that killing off these senescent cells in the body can improve health and ultimately, we think, could extend lifespan.
David Sinclair called senescent cells zombie cells, and he suggested that we need to kill them to live longer. I noticed that humans in general are obsessive with killing zombies. A lot of the video game industry is based on that exciting goal, and now it's also the supplement industry. Seriously, those senescent cells are simply regular cells that used to be healthy and functional. They stopped being useful, and now they are retired cells. To be more scientifically accurate, a senescent cell is a state a healthy, normal cell reaches as a result of reaching the end of their life cycle. Cells can become senescent due to age and also due to exposure to some chronic stress such as damage, radiation, mechanical pressure, or even infection as a protection mechanism from cancer, locking the cell growth forever in case it will become cancerous later. And unlike cancer cells, and despite the belief in our longevity community, senescent cells do have useful purposes in our bodies. First, senescent cells play a role in wound healing. When you remove all senescent cells, wound healing slows down. Let's hear Dr. James Kirkland expand.
It's been shown in some of the animal models where you clear cells, some of which are senescent, but if you target P16 expressing cells and remove them, you delay wound healing. It's been shown that by a group in California, that if you add back platelet-derived growth factor, you restore wound healing. And it turns out that it's the senescent cells that don't have a SASP that produce that. So you do need them early on to help clear up the wound. You wouldn't want to give it these drugs right away. But in a chronic wound, they may help.
Also, these cells have a role during pregnancy. Senescent cells produce factors in the last 5 days of pregnancy to drive the baby through the birth canal. And also, senescent cells can be important in cancer prevention and delaying cancer progression, producing toxins against cancer, and also call the immune system to check the area for other cancerous cells. Let's hear Dr. James Kirkland, in my opinion the worst expert on senescent cells, explaining when senescent cells truly become a problem.
The senescent cells are normally removed by the immune system, specifically by NK cells. The belief is that this threshold phenomenon is due to the rate of spread of senescence exceeding the ability of the immune system to clear them. And then once senescent cells begin to accumulate, they can poison the immune system, and NK cells themselves can start to become senescent. So there's a threshold effect. What we're trying to do is get below that threshold. We find that if we get below the threshold, for example, even with drugs that don't cross the blood-brain barrier, we're able to have a reduction of senescent cells in the brain because the body's own immune system can start to take over. It's less poisoned by senescent cells, and there's less spread of senescence.
So the problem is not senescent cells per se as much as their out-of-control accumulation when they reach a certain threshold. If they don't accumulate, the immune system can manage them, but lets them cross that threshold and they infect the immune system itself and the rest of the body with aging. They are aging infecting cells and become extremely dangerous, almost like cancer cells. They kind of stuck at the end of their life with no fertility or usefulness, and they also lost their ability on how to die. The immune system forgot about them. Their death button stopped working. So they're just hanging there producing bad communication that hurts the rest of the body. This is not good for your health. I believe this is an issue that Dr. David Sinclair referred to. They are not defective. They are a healthy process that can go awry. Therefore, our goal is not to kill senescent cells all the time, but simply preventing their accumulation. And a senolytic is an agent, either a supplement or a drug, that kills selectively senescent cells, not healthy cells. Now, you might have heard that fisetin and quercetin are being studied as senolytic agents. Resveratrol is from their plant polyphenol family. What does resveratrol do to senescent cells? It does different things at different doses. And instead of killing them, low-dose resveratrol does something different. This is fascinating. Let's see exactly what resveratrol does. This study from 2022, this study found, I'm quoting, the results show that low-dose resveratrol can induce autophagy of senescent macrophages, promotes cell viability and proliferation. It means that resveratrol keeps old cells young and prevent them from retiring and becoming sterile. This is fascinating. Resveratrol apparently is a very empathetic molecule. It has empathy to those old folks. Instead of killing them, it keeps them younger for much longer. Resveratrol rejuvenates senescent cells and their ability to be fertile again. And remember, fertility in biology means continuing the cell cycle. So with the help of resveratrol, these cells do not retire and they stay in the workforce and continue to have children. And this has to do with SIRT1, what Dr. David Sinclair has found. Let's see a study that speaks about the importance of SIRT1 with senescence. This paper from January 2022 says, the expression of SIRT1 is diminished with age, whereas its increased expression is sufficient to reduce cellular senescence and extend lifespan in many organisms. So this makes sense because we know that resveratrol accelerates SIRT1, and now we know that SIRT1 is active in cellular reproduction and rejuvenating senescent cells. Let's continue with more studies to see how resveratrol affects senescent cells. This study from 2021 says resveratrol inhibits the progression of premature senescence, partially by regulating SIRT1. SIRT1 is what Dr. David Sinclair's work evolved around. This study from 2022, quoting, SIRT1 activator resveratrol has biphasic effect on cellular senescence. At low concentration, it prevents cellular senescence and suppresses CESPs by activation of telomerase. It means that resveratrol keeps these mature cells fertile for much longer. This is good for our longevity. And it would seem that one of the ways resveratrol does so is by helping them to increase the telomeres length. Telomeres are the life clocks of each cell, and it would seem that resveratrol increases the maximum number of times cells can divide before they become senescent cells. The human analogy here that instead of retiring at age 67, they could live up to age 90 and have more children. Even better, resveratrol prevents cells under stress from becoming senescent. Remember, cells can become senescent due to age and also due to exposure to some chronic stress. This study shows that. They took muscle cells, or specifically baby muscle cells, and exposed them to stress that usually leads to cells becoming senescent. This study from July 2018 called Resveratrol Protects Muscle Cells Against Palmitate-Induced Cellular Senescence and Insulin Resistance. They said, Our results show that palmitate induced cellular senescence in both myoblasts and myotube. Resveratrol protected muscle cells from palmitate-induced cellular senescence, apoptosis during differentiation, and insulin resistance ameliorating autophagic flux. Very fascinating. This study, besides showing protection against senescence, also confirms two previous conclusions we had from this investigation. First, the study showed that resveratrol makes cells more resistant to dying, to apoptosis. This is the tiebreaker system we have seen where high dose did the opposite. And this study also confirmed that resveratrol helps to improve insulin. And I also wanted you to see that a good science is repetitive, boring, despite the fact that the mass media tries to tell us that the laws of nature change every week. They don't. The bottom line is this: low-dose resveratrol helps us to stay younger by targeting senescent cells and delay their aging. This helps to our longevity in a novel way. Then you may ask, what about the dose? What happens when we use high resveratrol instead of low resveratrol? Maybe the low dose of resveratrol increases their youthfulness, but maybe the high dose is going to kill them. Well, that's what I hope for when I research this. Let's see what happens. So here we are getting back to this January 2022 study where they compared low resveratrol with high resveratrol. So again, they said at low concentration, it was able to prevent cellular senescence. I'm quoting, however, at higher concentration, resveratrol acts as a pro-oxidant triggering growth arrest, meaning stop of growth, and induction of senescence and or apoptotic death in multiple cell lines. So what we can see that the benefits disappear, and in fact resveratrol does exact opposite thing. It induces senescence. This is another study from 2020 comparing low resveratrol and high resveratrol. I'm quoting, low-dose resveratrol promoted self-renewal, whereas high levels of concentration of resveratrol increase senescence rate and inhibited self-renewal. So with high-dose resveratrol, you completely lose this longevity benefit and you achieve different target. So increasing the dose takes all the benefits of the low dose and change the purpose, the activity of resveratrol. And in fact has a reverse activity. This is fascinating. To me it makes sense. High resveratrol encourages senescence because it prevents the cells from dividing and preventing fertility. What works against cancer isn't so effective against senescent cells. And this could explain so many things we discovered so far. While in Sinclair's study, when we went up from low dose to higher dose of resveratrol, in both obese and everyday feeding groups, the mice lost the longevity benefits in high resveratrol. We don't prevent their cells from becoming old, senescent. We also have an insight about how this difference of action of resveratrol on senescent cells could explain conflict in studies in resveratrol, because we can see how the dose can completely change the effect. So if you run the same study with different dose, you can achieve different conclusions. This could be very confusing for the scientific community unless they understand how resveratrol works. So this is extremely important if you're a scientist. Third insight, that we have a further support for our tiebreaker theory. Resveratrol creates perceived stress that speaks directly to our genes, to the DNA that makes the decisions. If the DNA sees a small amount, it will increase the longevity of the cell. But if it's too much, meaning high-dose resveratrol, it will get rid of the cell, either by apoptosis, cell death, or via induction into senescence state. High-dose resveratrol could tell to the DNA there is too much stress, suggesting cell damage, and that cell could become cancerous. This communication can lock the cell into a senescent cell to make sure it won't become cancerous, and this cell now begins to call the immune system to see if there are additional other cancer cells around by increasing inflammation. This locks the cell out of function and fertility, even if it's a young cell. That's not good for longevity in everyday use. Does it make sense to you? For the fourth conclusion, let's get reminded of what is senolytic. Senolytic is an agent, either a supplement or a drug, that kills selectively senescent cells, not healthy cells. The fourth conclusion is that, unfortunately, resveratrol is not a very good candidate as a senolytic in high doses. Instead, it is a great candidate in low doses to keep cells away from becoming senescent in the first place. This is excellent for us because, as we have seen, senescent cells aren't a problem when in normal amounts. It's their accumulation, the threshold effect Dr. Kirkland had mentioned. In low-dose resveratrol, by extending the cell's life, it prevents too many cells from becoming senescent, which could prevent accumulation of many cells becoming senescent together. Does it make sense to you? So if resveratrol is not a good senolytic, do we have other molecules that can be good candidates? Luckily, if molecules come from the same family, they still can help us achieve different longevity targets, which leads me to the two molecules from resveratrol polyphenol family, fisetin and quercetin. Let's hear what Dr. David Sinclair says about them, and then we will figure out how they work and which doses are tested for senolytic agents.
Quercetin, which is a molecule related to resveratrol, which is also suppresses the activity of senescent cells. And there's another one that I'm experimenting with to have a look what happens. I know when something negatively affects me or positively, and so I can do these experiments on myself. So the one that I'm testing out is fisetin, Fisetin, fisetin. We showed in 2003 and 2005 in two Nature papers that it extends the lifespan of animals, small animals, worms and flies, but nevertheless it's been now shown that it's senolytic. It kills off the senescent cells in the body, at least in mice, probably in humans based on some human data.
Do you remember the analogy of the tiebreaker in our cells, in our bodies? How the amount of stress is the trigger death. But now we maybe could achieve that with a different target. This gives us a huge insight into how these supplements, fisetin, quercetin, and pterostilbene may work. Maybe in low doses they activate longevity genes that resveratrol doesn't, and maybe these polyphenols in high doses can target the senescent cells that resveratrol can target. And indeed, some data, for example, suggest that taking fisetin and quercetin in high doses for a short time targets senescent cells directly. I'm reading from this 2018 study. Acute or intermittent treatment of old mice with fisetin reduce senescence marker. When I say acute, they mean high dose for a short time, similar to high dose resveratrol in cancer. I'm continuing. Fisetin reduce senescence in subset of cells in urine and human adipose tissue, demonstrating cell type specificity. This suggests a different targeting of different renegade cells than high resveratrol. If this fisetin data is true in humans, besides resveratrol, maybe other polyphenols like fisetin can target other renegade cells, possibly in different ways from resveratrol, achieving a complementary effect. Unfortunately, unlike resveratrol, thanks to Sinclair spurring interest in this molecule, we don't have nearly as much data as we have in resveratrol case. By the way, I haven't seen any data on low-dose fisetin, so I'm not actually sure how exactly it targets longevity, but I have the feeling it can target different longevity pathways than resveratrol. But from what I have seen, more studies are supposed to come in 2023 and 2024. And you will find in the future in this channel research video on those supplements when enough data is available. Until that, the decision what to do with those supplements is yours. Whether fisetin kills senescent cells like this study showed or not, one thing is certain to me. Exactly like with resveratrol, different doses are going to work differently because they apply the stress tiebreaker like in resveratrol case. Meaning the dose of those supplements matters to what you try to achieve when you take them. So if we want to target longevity pathways, maybe we need to choose low doses in everyday use. But if we want to take quercetin and fisetin to kill those senescent cells, maybe then we need to go up to 1 to 2 grams. Not understanding the doses of those supplements can create controversy too in the research world. If, for example, researchers will examine 100 milligrams of fisetin and observe no effect on senescent cells, you can throw that study out of the window. It doesn't mean anything.
The fisetin trials, and it's to test the efficacy of senolytics. And there's a trial which is just beginning. It's going to be in when it's fully rolled out in 129 nursing homes across the United States. It's funded by the NIH. And this will be for patients who test positive or have tested positive for coronavirus who are nursing home residents.
So in this ongoing study that Dr. Kirkland has mentioned, they are trying fisetin to kill senescent cells. This is because these cells, when accumulated, worsen our reaction to COVID-19. And the study, they are using 20 milligrams per kilo in human adults. This translates to 1.5 grams of fisetin per 70 kilo person, or 154 pounds. So what do I do with this information? The obvious implication is taking a dose that will delay a cells from becoming senescent, instead of causing healthy cells to become senescent. Based on this investigation in this channel, and you need to see it from the beginning to not judge this video alone, today I take 50 to 120 milligrams of resveratrol, and not every day. I take them 3 days off every week, and also 24 hours or more before exercise, as I'm going to show you in the next video. I have no doubt, this dose should work the best for longevity in healthy people. It doesn't apply to sick or ill people. Regarding dosage, weight matters more than age. If I were heavy, and I'm not, I would take 100 or 120 milligrams. If I'm 6'7", I may go up to 130. If I'm a thin, small woman, I would take 50 milligrams. But I would not go to 200 milligrams. In my opinion, there is a risk of a reversal of this effect, like we have seen in the cancer studies and in this video about senescent cells. And I don't need resveratrol pushing cells to die or to make them senescent. The second practical implication has to do with senolytics. Well, my thinking now is I'm too young for this. I'm 35, thin, and it's unlikely that senescent cell accumulation will be an issue, especially that these cells play a role in good health, and my immune system is young enough to clear them. Let's hear Dr. Kirkland speaks about which people, at what age, benefit the most from targeting senescent cells.
Looks like there are situations, for example, in younger female animals where senolytics can actually do some harm. There's some indication in some studies of that. So I think, mice generally, for example, most mouse strains don't have much in the way of detectable senescent cells before 16 months of age. Why would you give senolytics at 4 months of age? They seem to be most effective in the case of mice that are naturally aging without, that are non-disease models, when you give them at 24, 27 months, that kind of age, when there's an accumulation of senescent cells.
I spoke about my age, but obviously over the age of 60, these senescent cells begin to accumulate and cause problems. So my perspective will change when I'm going to be 55 or 60. The older I am, the more frequent I would take it. So maybe if I'm 70, of course consulting with my doctor first, I would take it every quarter for 1 day. And you only need 4 hours of exposure to kill them. Let's hear Dr. James Kirkland expands.
So it just takes a brief exposure to senolytics. 4 hours or so exposure is enough to initiate the process of apoptosis, which takes 18 hours to complete. So a very brief exposure is sufficient to initiate an irreversible death of senescent cells.
Another note here is pregnant women should never take senolytics because of the role senescent cells play during pregnancy. Taking 500 milligrams of fisetin and quercetin every day, like what I've heard Dr. David Sinclair says that he's doing right now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If I were to take it every day and also try to achieve a synergy with low-dose resveratrol, I would take it in low doses, around 30-50 milligrams per day. And I would cycle it exactly like with low-dose resveratrol. I wouldn't take it every single day. I would take time off of those supplements as well. And lastly, everything I said here is not personal recommendation. The whole purpose of this investigations with all the videos that you may have seen is not to tell you what to do, but to give you an insight and understanding so you can customize that into a lifelong habit of longevity, based on understanding, not because I said so. It's your body and your responsibility, and you also need the understanding to be motivated to keep the habit for a long, long life. So far, we've become more and more sure that the most popular resveratrol researcher, Dr. David Sinclair, takes the wrong dose. We also have seen how we can use these plant supplements to achieve different goals depending on the dose that we are taking. But there is another huge piece to the story: the timing. In the next episode, we will understand why resveratrol studies in humans show that resveratrol hurts exercise benefits. We'll discover why most people take resveratrol in the wrong time, and what's the perfect time to take resveratrol for maximum exercise benefits and longevity benefits. Until that, please share this video and subscribe to the channel to have a long-term, in-depth free education on longevity, because the correct data interpretation means everything.